Okay, so are you ready to dive into this election?
Absolutely. Let's get into it.
All right, because it's a big one to unpack.
Huge.
The 2024 election results are in, and, well, President Trump is back in the White House.
Yeah, it's a comeback that I think a lot of people are really struggling to wrap their heads around.
Yeah, and we're going to try to wrap our heads around it,
Let's do it.
at least as best we can. We've got tons of news clips, we've got expert analysis, all that good stuff to try to figure out what this means, not just for the country, but for you listening right now.
You got it. So let's jump right in. I think the biggest thing that stands out to me is not just that Trump won, but the scale of the victory.
Right.
I mean, we're talking electoral college, we're
Yeah.
talking popular vote. That's not a detail a lot of people are picking up on.
Yeah, I think it's easy to just see the headline, Trump won, but it's
Yeah.
like, wait a minute, there's a lot more to unpack there.
Way more to it, and it really shows how much the political landscape is shifting.
Absolutely. And just to add to that even more, Republicans now have control of the Senate and the House.
Total power shift.
Total power shift. So one state that really stood out to me in all this was Pennsylvania. What happened there?
Pennsylvania was huge. So Senator-elect David McCormick, he flipped a traditionally blue seat.
Yeah.
So that really handed the Republicans the Senate majority.
Okay, so he was a really important factor in all of this.
Definitely a key player. And I think what's even more interesting is he's really focusing on energy dominance and economic relief for working families. And these aren't just like, talking points. It seems like there's a real trend in the Republican Party to address certain economic anxieties of voters.
Yeah, and I want to get into the implications of McCormick's win, especially on Pennsylvania's economy in a little bit. But before we go there, you mentioned a power shift. I mean, there's also this huge power struggle happening right now in the Senate, right, for the leadership.
Oh, absolutely. Big time. Yeah. So we have Senators Rick Scott, John Thune, and John Cornyn. They're all vying for that majority leader position, and it's getting messy.
Yeah, sounds like a lot of drama.
Yeah, it's a total drama fest, and it gives us a little peek into what the Republican Party might look like going forward.
Okay, so to recap, we've got a massive power shift, this potential blueprint for Republican strategy that we're seeing in Pennsylvania, and a leadership battle brewing. So let's unpack this Senate race, this leadership race, a little bit more, because I think it's important for our listeners to understand what's at stake here.
For sure. I mean, whoever gets that majority leader spot, they're going to have a huge influence over which bills get to the floor, which committees get priority. It really sets the tone for the whole Senate.
It's a lot of power.
A lot of power, yeah. Think of it as a mini election within the election.
Right.
It can impact everything from immigration to the economy.
And I know there's even some talk of some investigations into the Biden administration.
Oh, yeah. Things are going to get interesting for sure. The drama's not over.
It's just beginning.
It's just getting started.
Okay, so to understand what might be coming next, we need to understand who these players are. So let's start with Rick Scott. What's his story?
Well, Scott, his background is actually in business. So he transitioned into politics and served as the governor of Florida and then got elected to the Senate back in 2018.
Okay, so he's been around for a while.
He's been around. He's been a really vocal supporter of Trump. And even back in the 2022 midterms, he played a big role in getting those Republican Senate numbers up.
I didn't realize that.
Yeah, so he was actually the chair of the National Republican Senatorial Committee. So he knows his way around the party.
Okay, so he's got the experience, he's got the connections, and he's got the loyalty.
Yeah, he checks all the boxes.
Where does he stand on the issues that are likely to be important in Trump's second term?
So Scott is known for being fiscally conservative.
Okay.
He's always been really critical of government spending and is a big proponent for policies that are aimed at shrinking the national debt.
Okay, so where does that put him in relation to Trump?
Well, he's also in line with a lot of Trump's immigration policies, like the border wall. So that really makes him a front runner for this leadership position.
Interesting. So it sounds like we could be looking at a pretty hardline approach in the Senate.
It's definitely a possibility, yeah.
Okay, so we've got a good picture of Rick Scott, his background, his stance, and his potential impact, but we can't forget about those other contenders, right? John Thune and John Cornyn.
Right, right. So Thune and Cornyn, they represent a more traditional wing of the Republican Party. They've been in the Senate for a while, been around the block a few times. They're known for being more pragmatic.
So how do they compare to Scott?
Well, they might not be as closely aligned with Trump's agenda as Scott is, and that could lead to some friction.
Okay, so where do we see that friction? Like, where do they differ?
So, for example, Thune has been critical of Trump's trade wars, arguing that they hurt American farmers and businesses.
Okay.
And then you've got Cornyn, who's expressed some reservations about Trump's use of executive orders, basically saying he's trying to bypass Congress
Interesting. So they're not afraid to kind of push back a little.
No, not really, no. And I think these differences highlight some of the internal tensions that are bubbling up in the Republican Party.
So it's not just a leadership race. It's really a reflection of this larger ideological battle within the party.
Exactly. And depending on who wins this race, it could have huge consequences.
Yeah.
If Scott wins, you might see a Senate that's more aligned with Trump's agenda.
And they would have the power to actually push through some of those more controversial policies.
Possibly. Yeah.
The policies that Thune and Cornyn might actually resist.
Yeah, and I think that's where it gets interesting for the listener, because this isn't just some political chess game happening in Washington.
Yeah.
These decisions, these policies, they could directly impact your life.
So pay attention.
Pay attention, yeah. It's really crucial to understand what each candidate stands for because it could shape the future.
Okay, so we've established that the stakes are high. So let's move into something that I know a lot of people are talking about, which is Trump's agenda on immigration.
Yeah, I mean, I think a good place to start is with some of his statements about mass deportations and reinstating that Remain in Mexico policy.
Right, so let's break those down one by one, starting with mass deportations. Is that even a possibility?
Well, it's debatable. I mean, we could potentially be talking about millions of people here.
Right.
So just the logistics of identifying them, detaining them, and deporting them,
Yeah.
the scale of that is just immense, not to mention the legal and ethical considerations.
Right, and there's the economic impact too.
Of course, I mean, a lot of undocumented immigrants play a huge role in the U.S. economy.
In so many different sectors.
Absolutely. I mean, from agriculture to construction to hospitality. And then, of course, we can't forget the human cost.
Of course not.
You can't ignore that.
So it sounds like even if Trump really pushes for mass deportations, he's going to face a lot of obstacles.
Definitely some roadblocks, yeah.
All right, so what about Remain in Mexico? How does that even work?
So it's officially known as the Migrant Protection Protocols, or MPP, and basically it requires asylum seekers that are coming to the U.S.-Mexico border to stay in Mexico while their asylum claims are processed in the U.S.
So instead of waiting in the U.S., they get sent back to Mexico.
Yes, and potentially for an indefinite amount of time.
And that's where the controversy comes in, right?
Exactly. I mean, there's so many concerns about exposing asylum seekers to dangerous conditions in Mexico, violence, extortion, and they have very limited access to legal help.
And I think there are also some concerns about whether the asylum process itself is fair under this policy.
Absolutely. There have been reports of asylum seekers not even having access to legal counsel or being rushed through the process without even being able to prepare their cases.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So it's very problematic.
So it seems like Remain in Mexico, while it might be effective in reducing migration, definitely raises some serious humanitarian and legal questions.
For sure, yeah. And these are just two examples of many complex issues surrounding immigration in the U.S. I have a feeling this is a conversation that's not going away anytime soon.
Absolutely, and I think it's something that we're going to have to unpack a lot more in the future as this develops. But for now, let's shift gears and talk about the economy, because that was another big thing that Trump focused on.
Right, and there's all this talk about Scott Bessent predicting a golden age for the economy under Trump.
Yeah, it's optimistic, to say the least.
Very optimistic, yeah. But it's important to understand what he's basing that on.
Right, because on the surface, I mean, there seem to be some obstacles there.
Yeah, definitely some potential roadblocks.
So what's Bessent's reasoning?
He's pointing to three main things: deregulation, energy independence, and lower interest rates.
Okay, let's break those down one by one, starting with deregulation. How could that potentially stimulate the economy?
So deregulation basically means reducing the number of rules and regulations that businesses have to comply with. So the idea is if you reduce the burden on businesses, it's going to be easier for them to operate and invest and create jobs.
So less red tape, more economic activity.
Exactly. It makes sense in theory, but I mean, regulations are put in place for a reason, right?
Right, to protect consumers, to protect workers, to protect the environment.
Exactly. So it's about finding that balance.
Right, where regulations protect people, but they don't hinder economic growth.
Right. It's a tough balance.
Okay, so what about energy independence? How does that play into Bessent's prediction?
So energy independence means a nation can meet its energy needs without having to rely on imports.
Okay.
Bessent believes that the U.S. can achieve this by increasing domestic production of oil and natural gas.
Okay.
And this could potentially lead to lower energy prices for consumers and for businesses, which then stimulates economic activity.
But what about the environmental impact of all that?
That's the big question, right? There are definitely environmental risks to consider, especially when it comes to climate change. So it becomes this debate about balancing the benefits of energy independence with the potential environmental consequences.
Another balancing act.
Another balancing act, exactly.
All right, so the last one was interest rates, right? How do those fit in?
So interest rates determine the cost of borrowing money. Lower rates make it cheaper for businesses to invest and for people to buy things like homes and cars,
Right.
and that can stimulate economic activity.
So he's basically betting on the Fed keeping those interest rates low.
Yeah, to encourage people to borrow and spend. But there are potential downsides to that, too.
Like what?
If you keep rates low for too long, you can end up with inflation.
Right, which can really hurt people.
Absolutely. It eats away at the value of your money.
So it's a gamble, basically.
It's a gamble, yeah. And it's also worth noting that the Fed is an independent body.
Right.
So even if Trump wants those lower rates, he can't just order them to happen.
Right. He doesn't have that power.
Exactly.
Okay, so it's not as simple as Trump snapping his fingers and we have a golden age.
Not quite, no. There are a lot of moving pieces here.
And one of those pieces I'm thinking of is Trump's approach to trade, especially tariffs.
Yes, tariffs are a big one.
Yeah.
They've been a major point of contention throughout his presidency.
And there are strong opinions on both sides.
Absolutely, yeah. So his supporters argue that tariffs are necessary to protect American businesses and jobs.
Right, but his critics argue that they hurt the economy.
Exactly, because essentially tariffs are taxes on imported goods.
Okay.
So while they offer some protection, they also tend to raise prices for consumers.
And then you've got the potential for retaliatory tariffs.
Yeah, which can then harm the overall economy.
It's a big mess.
It's a mess, yeah. And a lot of economists and policymakers are going back and forth on this, and we'll have to see how it all plays out in Trump's second term.
Yeah, because it seems like he's really intent on bringing manufacturing back to the U.S.
It'll be interesting to see how he tackles that.
It sounds like we've only just scratched the surface of what's going on.
Oh, we're just getting started.
Yeah, from the Senate leadership race to immigration policy to the economy. I mean, Trump's second term is already shaping up to be as unpredictable as his first.
It's going to be a wild ride, that's for sure.
So buckle up, everybody.
Okay, look.
And stay tuned, because this stuff really matters. It has the potential to impact all of our lives in huge ways.
Couldn't agree more, yeah. It's really more important now than ever to look beyond the headlines and really understand what's happening.
Absolutely. That's what we're trying to do here.
That's our mission.
So stay tuned. We'll be right back.
One thing that's really stood out to me
Mm-hmm.
is the media's reaction to all this.
It's been something else.
It has been, like watching a train wreck in slow motion.
Yeah, and I feel like so many media outlets were just not prepared for Trump to win.
Oh, no, not at all.
Their predictions were so off.
Totally.
And their coverage since the election has been,
Wild.
to put it mildly, yeah.
I think you can really sense the shock
Yeah.
and the disbelief in a lot of media circles. And it kind of shows this gap that's widening, between the media and the people they're supposed to be serving.
It's like they're operating in a totally different reality. Where Trump was supposed to lose, and his supporters all have these outdated views.
Exactly.
And the results obviously contradict all that.
Yeah, so it makes you think about what the role of the media even is in a democracy like ours.
That's a good question.
Are they just supposed to reflect what's popular, or are they supposed to challenge those opinions and give us different perspectives?
It's a tough question.
It is.
Like, where's the line between reflecting reality and shaping it?
Right.
But I do think it's obvious that the media needs to do some serious soul-searching after this.
I agree.
They need to figure out how to rebuild that trust with all the people they alienated.
Yeah, for sure. And I think it starts with them acknowledging their own biases.
Right.
I mean, the media is made up of people.
Yeah.
And people have biases. And those biases are going to affect their reporting.
So how do we even begin to bridge that gap between the media and the people?
I think a big part of it is getting more diversity of thought in newsrooms.
What do you mean by that?
So more reporters, more editors from different backgrounds with different life experiences and different points of view.
Okay, so more perspectives, basically.
Exactly. So when people see their own viewpoints represented
Right.
and treated with respect, they're more likely to engage with the news and trust it.
So it's about diversity and balance and respect.
Yeah, that's what makes a healthy media.
Let's shift gears for a second and go back to those legal battles that have been going on with Trump.
Oh, yeah.
What happens to all those now that he's back in power?
So as we said earlier, it's very likely that those cases, especially the January 6th and classified documents cases, those are probably going to be dropped.
And doesn't that raise some questions about whether we have a two-tiered justice system
It does, yeah.
where the powerful and connected people play by a different set of rules?
Exactly. And If Trump can just sweep his legal troubles under the rug because of his position, what does that say about our justice system?
Yeah, where does that leave the rest of us?
It sets a dangerous precedent.
So what about those investigations into the Biden administration that we've been hearing about?
So with Republicans controlling both the House and the Senate,
Right.
those investigations are definitely possible.
But will they actually find anything?
That's the big question. I think it's important to remember that these investigations can get really political.
They can be weaponized, basically.
Absolutely, they could turn into witch hunts, and it's not really about the truth anymore.
So how do we know what to believe?
We need to be skeptical, you know? We can't jump to conclusions. We need to let the process play out and see what the evidence actually shows.
All right, so we've talked about the election results, the power shifts in Washington, the media, the legal stuff.
It's a lot.
It's a lot. It feels like we're in this uncharted territory, and it's a little scary, to be honest.
Yeah, it's definitely a bit unsettling.
So what are your big takeaways from all this?
I think the big one is we're a nation that's deeply divided,
Yeah.
and the gap between us seems to be getting wider.
It feels like it.
Yeah, and this election really highlighted that. Both sides were fighting so hard for every single vote, and it was almost an even split.
Yeah, and it's scary to think about what happens if we don't figure out how to bridge that gap.
I agree. It's not sustainable in the long run. It could have really bad consequences for our country.
So how do we even begin to heal? How do we even start that conversation when it feels like everyone's just shouting at each other?
Well, it has to start with listening.
Okay.
Really listening to each other, like with an open mind, trying to understand where the other side is coming from.
So creating spaces for civil discourse, for respectful conversations.
That's it, yeah. It's about finding that common ground.
Recognizing that we don't have to agree on everything
Yeah, but we can still work together.
to solve problems.
Exactly.
It's a concept that I think we've lost sight of.
A little bit, yeah.
Yeah.
But it's still there.
So what can we expect from Trump in this second term?
Well, he's made it very clear that he's going to keep pushing his agenda.
Yeah.
And now that he has a Republican-controlled Congress, he'll have a much easier time doing that.
Oh, yeah, he's going to face a lot less resistance.
Exactly. And that could have huge consequences both here and in other countries.
So more of the same, but maybe even more so.
I think that's a safe bet.
Yeah.
I mean, domestically, we're probably going to see more polarization
Yeah.
as those policies continue to divide us.
And what about internationally?
Well, we might see a more isolationist approach
Okay.
as he puts American interests first.
It sounds like the next 4 years are going to be pretty intense.
They are. And we all need to stay informed and stay engaged because the decisions that are made now are going to affect us for a long time.
That's why we're doing this.
That's what we're here for, yeah.
Uh,
We want to be your guide through all this.
help you make sense of it all.
So buckle up, everyone.
Yeah. Buckle up.
The ride's not over yet.
But before we move on, I want to circle back to something we were talking about earlier,
Okay.
about how so many of the experts got this election completely wrong.
It really makes you think,
It makes you wonder if we really understand what's going on in this country.
yeah, like what are we missing?
It's like they were all looking at the same information but interpreting it in completely different ways.
Bizarre.
So what are the blind spots?
I think one of the big ones is this tendency to focus too much on coastal urban perspectives,
Okay.
especially in the media,
Yeah.
because the media is mostly concentrated in big cities,
Yeah.
and their worldview doesn't always match up with the experiences of people in rural areas.
It's that bubble thing again.
Exactly. It's easy to get caught up in your own bubble and forget that there's a whole other world out there.
But America's huge.
It is.
And we're diverse.
Incredibly so.
So we need to make sure we're taking all those different perspectives into account.
And I think another blind spot is this assumption that demographics are destiny. So the idea that certain groups will always vote a certain way, and this election showed us that that's not always true.
We saw some big shifts.
We did, especially among Hispanic voters, and it shows that we need to be more nuanced in our understanding of how different groups view politics.
It's not as simple as we thought.
No, not all.
So what does all this mean for the listener? Why should they care about these blind spots?
I think it's a reminder to be careful about the information you're consuming, whether it's from the media, from politicians, even from your friends and family.
Don't just take everything at face value.
No, be critical, ask questions, dig deeper.
Do your own research.
Exactly. Form your own conclusions.
Don't let yourself get swayed by all the rhetoric and the noise.
Yeah, challenge your own assumptions and biases, and be open to learning from people who see things differently than you do.
So it's about staying curious.
Always staying curious.
Yeah, because there's always more to learn.
Always.
So what's next? What do we do with all of this information?
I think it starts with cultivating a healthy skepticism.
Oh.
So again, don't take everything you hear at face value, whether it's from the media, politicians, your own social circles.
Think critically.
Engage in thoughtful discussions with people who have different viewpoints, challenge your own biases, and most importantly, stay curious.
Because learning is a lifelong process.
It is.
It's not about finding all the answers.
It's about the journey.
And today, we've tried to give you a glimpse into that journey,
That's right.
to give you the tools to understand what's happening in our country right now.
We've looked at the players, the issues, what the consequences might be.
But the story isn't over.
No, not even close.
Things are changing all the time.
And the choices we make in the next few years are going to have a huge impact on where we go from here.
So stay informed.
Stay engaged.
And stay curious.
Because your voice matters, your vote matters. This is your democracy.
So make it count.
Make it count.
We were talking about those blind spots, you know, how all those experts and analysts got the election so wrong.
It's a bit humbling, yeah. Like, it really makes you wonder if we really understand the forces that drive politics in this country.
It's like they were all looking at the same information, but seeing it in completely different ways.
Totally different lenses.
So what are we missing? What are those blind spots?
I think one of them is this tendency to put too much emphasis on, like, the coastal cities, the urban perspective.
Okay, yeah,
You see this a lot in the media,
right,
especially because most media outlets are concentrated in places like New York and LA.
right.
And their worldview might not line up with people in rural areas or the Midwest, you know.
It's that bubble thing again.
It is. It's so easy to get caught up in your own bubble and forget that there's a whole other world out there.
And another blind spot, I think, is this idea that demographics are destiny.
Right, like you could just predict how someone's going to vote based on their age or race or whatever.
Yeah.
But this election really blew that out of the water.
We saw some big shifts.
Huge shifts, especially among Hispanic voters, which tells us that we need to be more nuanced in our thinking.
So it's not as simple as we thought it was.
Not even close.
So for the listener, why does this matter? Why should they care about these blind spots?
I think it's a reminder to be really careful about the information you're consuming, whether it's coming from the media, from politicians, even from your friends and family.
So be critical.
Be critical, yeah. Ask questions, do your own research, form your own conclusions.
Don't just take everything at face value.
Exactly. Don't let yourself get swept up in the hype and the emotion of it all.
So what's next? Where do we go from here with all this?
I think it starts with being skeptical, like having a healthy sense of skepticism.
Okay.
Don't just believe everything you hear, whether it's from the media, from politicians, or even from your own social circles.
Right, so think for yourself.
Think critically. Engage in thoughtful discussions with people who might have different viewpoints than you. Challenge your own biases.
And most importantly, stay curious.
Yeah. Always stay curious, because learning is a lifelong journey, right?
It's not about finding the right answer.
It's about the process, the journey of learning and questioning.
So today, we've tried to give you a starting point for that journey.
Yeah, like a framework for understanding this crazy political moment we're in.
We've looked at who the players are, what the big issues are, what the potential consequences could be.
And this is just the beginning.
Yeah, it's not over.
The political landscape is constantly changing, and the choices we make in the next few years are going to have a huge impact on where we go from here.
So stay informed, stay engaged, and stay curious.
Remember, your voice matters, your vote matters. This is your democracy.
Make it count.
Make it count. And on that note, I think it's time for us to step back and let you continue your own exploration. Delve into the topics that resonated with you. Dig deeper into the issues that matter most to you.
And don't be afraid to question your own assumptions and perspectives.
Absolutely. There's a whole world of fascinating complexities out there just waiting to be uncovered. So go explore, and remember, we're all in this together.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time.